Writing from the soul is the mother of all invention, and 21 Grams is back for another season of this exploration. We will look into the artist and the art they create. Except, this season we're adding the questionnaire, invented by the great Bernard Pivot, to go even deeper. They say 21 grams is the weight of the soul, and this show is the scale. So now here's your host for 21 grams, Joe Compton. Well, he says I'm going to remember to switch the graphic or switch the people so that where the person is actually on the right side. Anyway, hello everybody and welcome to 21 grams. I'm your host, Joe Compton. And it's great to have you here. Look, everybody, I got Ariel Dawn here. This is going to be awesome. This is going to be a lot of fun. Anita's here. Hello, Anita. Nice to see you. And so always how I like to open the show, Ariel, is just to have you introduce yourself, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, give us some insight into who you are and what you do.
Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Ariel Dawn. I have been writing since 2020. I write a little bit of everything, mostly paranormal romance, monster romance, reverse harem, some urban fantasy, but I also dabble in contemporary, and I have some alien sci-fi stuff coming out this year as well. So I'm kind of a little bit into everything.
Nice. I mean, for you, does it start and stop with the romance, though? Is that where it really holds
For the
its
most
weight?
part, I do have some series that are a little bit more less romantic, like my Lost Soul series. It still does have some romance in it, but it's a little bit more on the urban fantasy side. But for the most part, the majority of my stuff is romance. Yes.
It's interesting to me because you have also built a kind of collaborative reputation. Like people really love to collaborate with you, and you do a lot of different collaborations. You have one coming out with our friend AJ Mulkin coming up soon.
Yes.
So what is it about the collaborative process that you enjoy? Well, why do you gravitate toward that a little bit?
I think the easiest answer for that is that writing is a very isolated thing, right? For a lot of people, especially when you're writing, your own books. And there's a sense, I want to say, of almost like a sense of loneliness where it's just you, and you're the one who's got a plot, and you're the one who's got to figure out the and then and what comes next. When I'm co-writing, it's a little bit easier because I have somebody who I can kind of bounce things back and forth off of. A lot of my co-authors are very different in their writing styles, which is something I really enjoy. I enjoy kind of experimenting and being a little bit like a chameleon. Writing with AJ is very different than writing with Quell T. Fox or writing with Margaret Bon Collins. But I enjoy that experience of kind of going back and forth and adapting and learning new techniques and learning new vantage points and things like that. And I'm a Leo. I'm social, and I love talking to people, and I love going back and forth. And even when I'm not co-writing, I'm often workshopping with people on blurbs, on chapters, on all those different things. So,
is the process different for you in any way, or do you find it to be very similar?
I think writing my own books, I'm a little bit less organized. When I'm co-writing, I'm a little bit more organized. And some of that has to do with, I think, just in general, my ADHD. When it's just me, I'm kind of like, oh, well, I can get this chapter up when I can get it up. But when I'm co-writing with somebody, it's like, okay, I need to have the chapter done so that they can, read and they can write their chapter. So it kind of forces me to be a little bit more organized.
I look at the plethora of books that are standing between us here, and something that strikes me is obviously the covers, and the covers are a very important part, especially in paranormal romance, in the genres that you write in. And how much time do you spend thinking about that, and when is the cover the element that you're thinking about? Obviously, when you're into like book 3 or 4, you have a design in mind already because you're going to try and keep the series together and kind of make it cohesive. But when you're starting a fresh series or something, are you thinking about the cover right away? Is it after you've written something? When does the cover come into play for you? Because that's a big important element of
Mhm.
your genres that you write in?
So for me, when I first started writing, it was more or less I came up with the cover at the end. But the more I started writing, the more I started doing the cover at the beginning.
Hmm.
Some of that was my publisher who was kind of like, we need to figure this out first, and then kind of get an idea to build off of. And for the most part, I feel like most of my co-authors as well were kind of in the same ballpark with that. We try to get the cover first and get all that stuff hashed out. Usually we have a couple chapters maybe written before we start looking, and start talking about it, just so we can kind of meet our characters and kind of get that idea of like what our world building is going to be so that we know what exactly we're looking for in terms of covers. But now, yeah, it's definitely more in the beginning phase.
Are you is that something that you love, looking at, is the cover and kind of figuring that out? Is that does that motivate you at all? Do
I
you,
think so, yes. For
yeah,
me, I'm a very visual person. So
yeah.
if I have that cover kind of like in the back of my brain, I'm thinking about those characters, how they look on that cover. Like that's how I'm envisioning them as I'm writing them. And
Mm.
that's how I know my readers are going to envision them when they read them. So
And everything you do for the most part is character driven.
very.
You know, I mean, obviously they have plots. I mean, we're
Mhm,
not talking about, gratuitous sex or anything like that. But we're not, or gratuitous violence in a lot of
mhm.
these respects too. But uh, you know, d- developing the characters for you, do you find like you set a mindset for one character and kind of build off of that with the other characters, or is it you have several characters and you're trying to mesh them into a universe? How do you separate your characters at all, or is it just around the main character and kind of figuring out who they're going to interact with?
It definitely depends, and it varies series to series. With series like my Ava Crowley Vampire Slayer series, for example, um, Ava was a character who had come up in another book. And
Mm,
so readers really liked her, and I gave her her own series. And as I wrote that series, I kind of really got to delve into more of some of these other characters that we had seen before, but didn't really know a lot of. And then they got their own series. But there are other times when I'm writing, like with Quality Fox, when we came up with our Shifters of Starfall Creek series. It was very much more, this is the character, this is who we're following. And we do have some side stories. It's mostly just bonus content. But that series is just, that's Jade and the boys. And then it just kind of, I feel like it differs. For me, my characters are very real.
mm.
So I feel their voices, I feel their emotions. And so they kind of tell me if it's going to be their story, if there's going to be a spinoff. I'm the queen of, well, I thought this was going to be one book and it turns into six. So
Are they selfish when they talk to you? Because it sounds like maybe they're willing to let other characters shine, which is kind of unusual.
that's what's kind of funny is, especially I think the series that illustrates that the most is my interconnected Ava Crowley Vampire Slayer series and my Hunter Game series. So it
Uh-huh.
follows the sister and it follows the brother. And so as I was writing, I want to say it was Blood and Ash, I realized towards the end, this other character, I was like, he's going to need his own book. He's like, he won't be quiet. He needs his own book. And he got his own book. So that was Blood of the Lost. So I definitely think, yeah, it's characters like Ava. She has her own series because she needs her own series. And she was the one that kind of built that from my first series, Forevermore. And so that, yeah, some of them are just way more spotlight hoggers than other ones. Other ones are willing to share the spotlight.
The other thing I find fascinating is as you're talking to me about, characters getting spin off and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Oftentimes in the fantasy genre, especially, there is like opportunities to do like novellas or short stories
Mhm.
about these characters and things like that. But it seems like to me you take the approach of, no, you know what, I'm gonna own them and I'm gonna make give them their own book or their own series. Uh, why do you feel like that's become the approach for you as opposed to kind of, giving reader magnets and little? I mean, I know you have them, but
Mhm.
it seems like you're more apt to write a whole series about them or a whole book about them than rather give them a little, give your audience a little taste of something.
I think for me, part of that just has to do with the way that my brain works and my ADHD. I can't. I'm not like a one and done person. I'm just not. I get very attached. And so like with the instance of I'll even say in my series with Margot Bon Collins, where instead of following the same character, we follow a different couple each book, but they all are featured in each other's books. I am a person who I grew up loving, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Supernatural, that episodic sort of, timeline and different characters popping in and out, and I like that. So that's kind of how I treat my books as well. I have characters who will show up in one series and they might make a cameo in another. That's really apparent with Ava and the Hunter Games, but I have in my speed dating books as well through 90 Nights Press. They're all standalone books, but they pop up in each other's books. So yeah.
So you even take the cross genre thing to the new level, and you'll cross world promote. You kind of bring characters into other worlds. Then it sounds like
Sometimes I do.
How do you keep track of all that? Is that just? I mean,
I have lists.
Okay.
I think the one that's the one that tricks me up the most is definitely Ava and the Hunter Games. Just because that is like a very overarching storyline. There's like 3 different series. They're all tiered together. They all mesh to be kind of like a Marvel Endgame sort of thing. So that's the one I think that takes the most concentration. But I have series Bibles, I have lists, I have timelines, I have notes just to make sure that everything lines up.
Yeah, Nia says lists are good.
Yes, very.
Yeah, and so I'm curious. Have you ever thought about like turning any of this into Vela? Have you looked at Vela as something, because that's an episodic kind of formula?
I have actually. I've looked at Vela. I've been looking at it this year. There are some things I want to try out on there. Because I do have a lot of stories in the back burner that don't have homes. So I was kind of looking at that. I just haven't figured out what exactly I'm going to test out there yet, but it's definitely something I do want to try.
So when you're crossing streams with other characters and stuff like that, and you're starting a new series, and another character from another book's going to pop in there, how careful are you to not overwhelm that particular series with the character that's going to make an appearance? Do you have a line that you're going to draw for those characters so that they don't? Because I imagine the first book's kind of an origin story for whatever series you're about to set up, and whatever character we're actually going to follow. If we're going to follow a different character than the one that you've kind of makes a cameo in the next book. So do you have a line? Do you find that you have a boundary for those characters?
I think for me, yes. I think probably a really good example of it would probably be my upcoming book, Thorn of Blood, which is technically the 3rd book in the Hunter Games series. But if you're reading them together with Ava Crowley, it's like the 6th book. So it kind of, you have that overarching plot, but I tend to have, because I write dual point of view very often, sometimes I will have that one character, like for instance, the Hunter Games is Mal's series, but he's not in all of the books, but he might have a cameo POV here or there to kind of help illustrate things or set things up and get things going on the way so that, the stars of the show can kind of come in and shine.
And you kind of touched on it when we were talking off air recently. We are talking about what books should I follow, with you, and your newest one, how to get into the rest of the series and things like that. And so the funny thing I found about our conversation was that, oh well, which series are we talking about? You have many open series that you're going through right now.
I do.
So, when do you know it's over? Do you have an end game for a lot of these series, or are you just leaving them open, hope maybe coming back to them when you get a chance to come back to them?
For instance, my Lost Soul series, there is an end. I am working on the last book.
Okay.
For Ava and the Hunter Games, they have several more books planned. I do have an end scope of where I know when I will end it. But sometimes I feel like I start to write a book and I'm like, well, this might need to be 2 books. Or this is going to be one very long book. So I do know, like, I have the cap of the end and I have an idea of how many more books there are going to be. So I do try to plan out an end. It's just how long it takes me to write them to finish them.
How about your collaborators? Are like, no, 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 we got to end it here. Sometimes do they kind of stretch that a little bit for you too?
We kind of usually know, I feel like, especially when collaborating. For instance, when I was writing the Starfall Creek series with Quell, it was supposed to be one book, and it was supposed to be a male-female book. And halfway through, we realized a couple of these characters just wouldn't be quiet, and it was going to be a reverse harem. So, and at that point, we said, okay, we're going to need another book because we're not going to be able to tie this all up in one. And about halfway through writing the second book, we said, okay, it's going to be 3. And I think that that's going to be it. And we can tie it all up in 3. Margot and I have, I believe, we're on our 4th book that's coming out. And we have at least 8 that were planned. So I think it kind of just depends. It varies per collaborator, per co-author.
But it does sound like you talk about it and kind of figure it out before you get it and get too deep into it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Setting wise, you do a lot of urban settings, you do a lot of urban fantasy settings, and what is it about the contemporary world that interests you to put your characters in these settings? Have you tried to like go into a historical setting or something, outer world before and it just didn't work? Or is it just that these characters have kind of the mindset of of who we are now? How do you feel like you want to stay in the urban setting?
I feel like for me, I do have stuff that is more fantasy based. It just hasn't been released yet. But I feel like for me, a lot of it is I like to kind of blend our history, like our own history and our own pop culture. Like I like to blend those things in with fantasy. And a lot of times there's a lot of themes in my books of the power of choice or the magic being within you, or being able, you being able to make that choice, you being able to rise to the occasion type thing. So I feel like for me, it's easier to write it in our world with all those types of themes and all those different magical abilities or spiritual abilities. For instance, my Forevermore series, it goes into our past, but it infuses magic into the past. In the cards, which partially takes place in the 1920s. I enjoy researching history and things like that, which is why I like to kind of infuse those little bits of pieces of history in with the fantasy and the magic as well. So I think that's kind of why I tend to stay more around the urban fantasy world and just kind of pull from both and mix them together.
Are you an Easter egger? You like to put little things that you know of in that from
Oh
history,
yeah.
especially in there?
Oh yeah. Especially with my Forevermore series, there's a lot of really fun historical references in there. Down to, I think, In the Garden has a couple characters. They go to like an opera in France in like the 1800s, and I mean, I was researching down to like what would have been playing at what opera house, what point in time, and it's in there. And it's happened to be Romeo and Juliet, which is obviously a big thing, obviously, for romance. And so I do like definitely going down those, and I do put Easter eggs in there. Even pop culture stuff too. I always say that my Ava Crowley Vampire Slayer series and Hunter Games are very supernatural and Buffy inspired, and there are tons of supernatural and Buffy references sprinkled all throughout the books, as well as Firefly and like other movie references, stuff like that too. So
Nice. All right, let's talk a little bit about how you develop your romance, because I think that's a fascinating element to what you do. And I always love talking to romance authors because I think for a lot of people that there's what they think romance is and what the
mm-hmm.
author and then the readers who become fans of romance think it is, and there's a nice differentiation there. You know, there's kind of this, there's a stigma, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
a acceptance, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a an interesting line that both of those straddle in terms of, you know, getting a little more gratuitous or getting a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
sexual. You know, and you know, for somebody who writes urban fantasy, do you tend, which lines do you tend to straddle the most, and how do you look at creating the romance within what you're trying to do?
I think for me, sometimes it's funny because before I started writing, I always loved reading books that had romance in them, but I
Hmm.
was one of those people that was like, ugh, romance, right? and I reviewed and I reviewed books and I would be like, do people actually talk like this? You know? And then it took me a little while and I realized there's an audience for everybody, right? So just
Right,
because it's not my cup of tea doesn't mean it's not somebody else's cup of tea.
right.
And then when I started writing books, I started realizing that for me, infusing my books with romance was a natural thing, just because it was what I like to read. But also, I started to see it from that other perspective. So I oftentimes try to remember that whenever I'm writing romance in my books.
Mm,
That that's the thing about the appeal of books in general, right? Is that you can hit so many different audiences. But how do you do that accurately if you're writing to someone who loves, Omegaverse, but also make it appealing to someone who has no idea what Omegaverse is.
right.
So I try to, a lot of times for me, when I'm developing my romance, because I already envision my characters as people or friends or just something that is very real, I try to make the romance real and relatable as well.
Mm,
And I also like to go out and I look and I see what other people are asking for or what other people would like to read, whether it is in romance groups, whether it is in urban fantasy groups, just to kind of get an idea of what people are tired of seeing and what people really want more of. So,
mm,
and I kind of bring all of that together. And when I am writing my romances, I do try to have heroines that are very relatable, who are also flawed. They're tough, but they're insecure too. I
mhm.
have my leading males are often not super muscly, beefy guys. They are shy, quiet, reserved types, or people who just maybe take a little longer to warm up or don't always say what they think. So I do try to write my people a little bit more relatable. And in that terms, the romance is more relatable, and it's more organic. It's not, I do write some insta love, but I do really like to see the journey of people as
Mhm.
they fall in love. So, and I hope
Do
my readers
you
do too. So,
do you find when you got comfortable with it, you were much better at it?
yes. My first couple books, I always say it's really funny. In the cards is Fade to Black because I had no idea at the time how to write romance. I was just kind of writing. It was my first book, and I was like, "This is it. This is my my magnum opus. If this is all I do, like this is it," type thing. And here I am, like 50 some titles later. So I want to say after the third book, I really kind of started to test the waters a little bit more
Mhm.
with doing more open door scenes and kind of learning the different tropes and the kinks and things that come with those tropes. And uh, reading helps a lot too. I think sometimes people
Yeah.
people undermine that. Like reading definitely helps.
Yeah, I mean, you throw out words like reverse harem and things like this,
Mhm.
and that automatically triggers something for somebody when they hear that, you know,
Mhm.
those terms. But like they're bad words in a lot of ways, you know. But they're not. You
Mhm.
know, there is a build that naturally just occurs, and there's relationships that have that element to them in real life that
Mhm.
people don't wouldn't classify that as because we don't talk like that, but
Right.
in fiction terms, we talk like that. And
Mhm.
so, do you find that's kind of how to get over the stigmas, just to kind of like, you know, slowly ease somebody into the idea that this really does exist? You just have to look at it as a person.
I think sometimes that's one of the reasons why I like to write all pairings, right?
Hmm.
I don't just stick to writing. I know I probably should sometimes. I don't just stick to writing one type of pairing. I write everything from male-female to male-male to polyamorous to everything in between. And eventually I will come out with a female-female book at some point. So because to me, that's part of the beauty of romance, right? Is those journeys of love. And those journeys of love can look different to so many people. And I want to be able to reflect that to just about everybody. So I think for me, that definitely hits. I do think that sometimes the way that we talk about it in fiction, I've had people say to me before, even with some of my books that have a little bit more kink in them, I didn't know about this, or this was a safer way for me to explore this, or this not necessarily like delivered it differently, but just made them think about it differently. And if I can do that, then my job is done.
Do you think that, well, I'm curious because you go into the next aspect of it, which is then you start to get fans of these that gravitate toward this, that know these genres, that know these kinks, and know how these things get built and how they, the readership of romance is very smart because they know what they want, they know how to get it, and they know what it is that's good about it, right? Or that they like about it, right? So do you find that has evolved your romance in any way because you're now developing a readership, and or do you think you're just getting the readership that tailors to what you're writing?
I think it's a little bit of both. So because I've been writing in all different genres pretty much all across the board since I started, a lot of my readers do know that I write all across the board, and they know that when they pick up, if they pick up Blood and Bones, which is male female, and then they go to pick up Monsters of Ashwood, they know that they're going to be different, but they know, since they know my writing, they know what they're getting. They know they're getting the description. They know they're getting, very character driven plots. They know that they're getting immersed in the world building, no matter what pairing or what world it is. But then I feel like there's also a bit too, because when I am diving into these new genres, I immerse myself in them as well as a reader. So I do tend to kind of jump from pond to pond, and I will find those people as well, and kind of, I don't want to say bring them to the dark side, but kind of here, come to the Ariel Dawn side. We have mermaid tail. It's fine.
That's the waters.
Yeah.
Do you find that sometimes they're a little more critical when you don't write enough romance in there?
I haven't run across that yet. I have had, I always find it funny. I've had one-star review where they were it was in my Monsters of Ashwood series, and they were, the sex was just too much for them. And I was like, all right, give me a gold star.
Yeah.
So I haven't run across that yet.
I got you. You read it, sucker.
I just, to me, and I always try to look at negative reviews that way too, right? Because no matter what you do, you're not going to make everybody happy. And your books are going to be for a certain audience. Sometimes people will pick them up and they will not be that audience, and that is okay. Absolutely. I'm sure other people will have probably read that review and been like, oh my God, but me, I made a graphic out of it and I started putting it everywhere.
That's awesome. And you know what? What's funny too is the idea of finding your audience is very important to a romance writer, especially because romance readers are so loyal, they're so dedicated, they'll go beyond the edges of earth for you if they find they like what you're doing, right? And so that's kind of the double-edged sword there.
It is. But also I feel like too, sometimes with me being a reader, I'm that way with authors that I love too. So there's a camaraderie there, I think, where, especially because I'm writing in these different genres, I want to be able to give them exactly what they want. So for me, I feel like a lot of times is having that engagement with my readers. And I have been known to write a book just because somebody said, oh, I wish you would write this. So I've been known to do that. That's how I wrote Bite Me. Somebody said, oh my God, I'd love a gingerbread shifter romance. That would be hilarious.
So you like to be challenged. Have you met a challenge you haven't been able to take on yet?
Not yet. And that's why I keep dipping my toe, and I keep doing different genres and trying different things. So far it's worked out.
I have to imagine, I know that you're friends with AJ, so but I have to imagine that. I mean, some of the stuff I've read of hers has curled my toes, and I've read a lot of stuff. I have to imagine that's a different experience for you than writing with some of the other collaborators you've written with. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I love writing with AJ. Like, love it. Love it. So much fun. I am enjoying working on our book that we are working on right now. So I'm really glad that we have a couple books coming out this year.
Yeah.
So we're working on Song of Silence, which is actually part of her Nowhere world.
Yeah.
And then we're working on a male story together called Trick or Treat. So I am really excited about that one.
Do people, when they meet you at like conventions and stuff like that, when you're selling, do they find it funny that you have like 3 or 4 standalone books?
No, I think it's one of those things too. Like when I go to conventions, I try to bring certain things.
Yeah.
But it is definitely like I have a variety. So, and people are always very interested in that, which is a good thing, I think. So,
Has anybody come up to you and said, "I read this standalone, and I'm wondering when you're going to write book 2," or anything like that?
not yet. I get more stuff. Sometimes I think for me is my Monsters of Ashwood series is a duet. So sometimes people are very much like, when are you going to write another monster romance? Like, and it's coming. Just give me some time. I wrote 25 books last year. Give me a minute.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I
Mhm.
mean, what is your process like? Do you have a set time that you write? Do you organize your writing sessions? How do you manage to have the output that you have?
I always attribute it to ADHD and coffee. So
Coffee's
I
coffee's an awesome motivator for
coffee is
sure.
an awesome motivator. And also deadlines, because for me, I've tried to write books. I've had books where I've had them for a year and I
Mhm.
write them a month before they're due. It's just who I am as an individual. I was the kid in school who did their homework the night before or the morning of the quiz. Like, that's who I am. And writing is no different for me. So I have a tendency, I block off time now. So I know that like during this time I'm working on this project, during this time I'm working on this project. And that has helped a lot. But for the most part, it really all depends on, I feel like, the deadline. I've written a book in 2 weeks. My record is 4 days. So it's just no matter how much time you give me, I work better with a fire. So
Are you finding your books are getting longer or shorter?
longer.
Yeah.
They are definitely starting to get longer.
Is that a product of you just becoming a better writer?
I think it's a little bit of me, honing my craft, becoming a better writer. And a part of
Mhm.
it is also just having more room to tell the story.
Mm.
I started out writing, I wrote a lot of novellas. My Lost Soul series is a series of novellas.
Mhm.
And I do find, especially with certain genres, such as reverse harem or why choose, uh, because I have multiple point of views, I do think that helps making it a little bit longer, just so I can kind of dive more into each person individually. So I think
Mhm.
that has something to do with it as well. So I think it's kind of a mix of things.
Yeah, a big topic on this show this year has especially been about genre and
Mhm.
how genres have tended to blend a lot more than they normally have in the past. Like, for romance writers especially, that I don't think it's ever been more true that you could literally be writing a crime fiction novel that has romance in it, and romance readers would gravitate toward that because number
Mhm.
one, it's your voice, and number
Mhm.
two, it has romance in it, right? So it's
Mhm.
acceptable. The genre doesn't matter as much as it used to a long time ago. I mean, obviously, if you're writing a cozy or contemporary romance or a traditional
Mhm.
romance, obviously those kind of readers are going to expect certain things, right,
Mhm.
within the genre, but you can still mix it a little bit of urban fantasy into those. You can sprinkle a lot of that into that. Have you found that genre hasn't been an obstacle for you? And do you feel like do you have like a set idea about genre, or you just kind of write it and then you kind of discover what the genre is going to be and kind of roll with that?
I think for me, I say mashup, right?
Hmm.
Because I am such a fan of so many different genres, a lot of times I do study them. I study, what is big in shifter romance, what is big in contemporary romance, and I kind of put that in the pot, in the cauldron, as you say, and then I look at another genre and see where there are similarities. I like, for instance, my Scared Shiftless series with Margot Bond Collins. It is shifter romance, but it's also sci-fi.
Hmm.
And so I kind of like to take two opposing sides or two genres that are similar or maybe share some cross, and I kind of mash things up and then add different tropes. I add different pairings.
Mm.
So I kind of always say I mix it in the cauldron, and that's how I read too.
Mm.
I read so many different types of genres that sometimes it's hard for me not to pull from those different things just because they influence my writing anyway.
Is there a genre here of all the books we're looking at that you haven't touched yet, that is in the works, or that you have something that you're looking forward to, or is there a genre that you're thinking about trying that you haven't attempted yet?
I think for me, I am working on a series that is more fantasy based.
Okay.
So it is my Lunar Heat series. It is still kind of in the vein of shifter romance, but it also kind of blends dystopian. There is some reverse harem in there, and there's also some shifter paranormal.
Mm.
So it is quite an amalgamation, and I am really excited to kind of try something that is a little bit more fantasy based in world. I have written a dystopian urban fantasy before,
Hmm.
Stormbringer, and I do have some more books planned in that series as well. So I think for me, the next big thing for me to try is kind of to break into would be more fantasy based stuff.
Do you do you like to be challenged? Is that kind of your thing? It
Yeah,
sounds like that's what it is. Is like
yeah,
somebody's going to challenge you, you're going to do it.
yep, pretty much. I say, what haven't I done? Let's do
Yeah.
that.
And would you be fair to say that it's because you're comfortable being the writer you are and you know your voice, or is it would you have done that from the beginning?
I think I would have done that from the beginning because that's just who I am.
Hmm.
I like to have different facets, and I like to try on different costumes and be different characters. I cosplay. So I have a tendency to I kind of like to have that imagination where I don't want to say that I am somebody else, but
Hmm.
that I can slot myself into a different world, or I can slot myself into a different way of thinking. So I think I would have done that regardless.
What's a key for you in writing a romance? What is a key trigger for you that you need to have in pretty much every romance that you write?
Definitely tension. I am one of those people that I really like the contrast of this is what I'm feeling, but this is what I'm conveying. So I like to have a
Mm.
little bit of that tension there, or I don't want to say misunderstandings. I think Ava and Cass are a really good example, where they're totally meant to be together, but the timing is never right, and there's circumstances that's just like they probably should go the other way, and it lasts for about 7 years. So there's a lot of meat there, of tension, of misunderstandings, of just somebody kind of being like, well, I have this idea in my mind and that's how it is, and I like to kind of illustrate the behind that. So for me, that's a key thing in a lot of my romance is that tension, that conflict between the leads that eventually obviously are perfect for each other.
And then you throw in paranormal elements and magic systems
Mm-hmm.
and monsters and crazy shit that
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's like could you imagine that being real life? Because sexual tension and tension
Oh my god,
amongst
yes.
as humans is a paramount thing that we all experience. But having all that stuff thrown into the mix, right, is like
Mhm.
do you find that's kind of where the I hate to say it because it's the only word that's coming to my mind, but the magic happens kind of idea.
Kind of. I think for me, a lot is I prefer conflict internally and emotionally than I do action wise,
Physically, and
right?
yeah,
But when I am writing, I always say Quell always says it best because we've written our series together. She liked to go in and mess everything up and make everything a little bit like actiony and like, oh my god, this fallout. And then I like to go in and tidy everything up and make it, like, okay, let's kiss and make up now. So I think for me that's another a definite big thing is the more internal emotional conflict of those things, and then being able to draw from allegories and metaphors of magic and
Mm.
animal behaviors and things like, and how we can use those tools to accentuate the human emotion.
In writing series, do you have a set idea of how you're going to get from one book to another? Do you know, have you, because you've now written several series, so do you kind
Mhm.
of have a rhythm that you understand, just maybe instinctually, even how to
I
get
do.
from book one to two to three to four kind of idea?
I do. I kind of have like an overarch of how to get from book 1 to book 2. For me,
Hmm.
book 1 is always the hardest. It's always the hardest no matter what it is because I know where it ends.
Mm,
I'm usually a lot better with the second book, and once I'm through the second book, the rest just kind of they just kind of come very easy. But it's those first two books I fuss over them a little bit more.
mm,
And then on the smaller scale in each individual book, I've kind of, having written so many at this point, I kind of have my own little formula down of, we start out here with this, and then by this point, this happens. It just kind of flows a little bit better. And I kind of know my own formula, I guess, at this point, so that
hmm.
it makes it easier when I'm going back in after my first draft to kind of tidy those things up. I already have, in a sense, the bones of it. So I know where I want to hit and when I want to hit it. And it's getting a little bit easier because I'm able to build those things as I write now. So
And then, um, do you have a device you like to use to kind of get from book one to book two? Are you a cliffhanger person? Are you someone who likes to prologue into the next book kind of idea? What do you have
I
a device that you like that you would lean on?
I don't like cliffhangers as much, um, but I don't shy away from them when
Hmm.
it fits. Mostly because like I'm just that person where if I read something and there's a major cliffhanger, I'm like, oh my god, I can't handle it. So I always think about that like when I'm writing the endings of my books to kind of segue stuff. I try not to have major cliffhangers unless there's like a really, really, really valid reason for it. Such as the end of Blood and Ash, which leads into Blood of the Lost. There is a massive cliffhanger there, but I knew there was going to be no other way. There was going to be no way to tie that up. And that's why the character got their own book. Uh, so I definitely think for me, I don't do a lot of prologues. I started when I first started writing, I did a little bit
Hmm.
more prologue heavy stuff. But I've kind of gotten away from that. I definitely lean more towards like a hook at the end of the
Mm.
next book that kind of just segues you into the next one with the next set of characters. So it just more or less just kind of like it ties up one, but it sets up the next
I have to say,
without,
I
I
think
was
the
gonna say,
cliffhanger.
without going too crazy on the cliffhanger.
Yeah. I have to say though, I think the cliffhanger gets a bad rap. I think that there's because I think it's been done so badly,
Mhm.
and people tend to lean on the badly ones a lot more. But I think there is a way you could do it that would be inventive and interesting. But I don't know. I don't. I'm not a big. I've really literally written two series, so I don't know that I have a style. But I just find that I don't know. Maybe it's because it's an easy device. I don't know, but
I don't know. I don't think cliffhangers are easy to write. I think it's one of those things where it's very much like it's like writing a blurb, right? You don't want to
Mm.
give like too much away, but at
Hmm.
the same time, you want to give just enough to be like, I gotta get the next book.
W- what does every one of your characters have that you find comfort in?
I think they all have those moments of like, I'm not good enough. How do I get to be good enough, right?
Interesting.
I think they all have like those moments, and usually it's like where they have to step up, right? They have to kind of
Mm.
like assume something that they really don't want to. I think that's one of the defining, I don't like to call them flaws, but it's like the defining traits of a lot of my firecrackers, my female main characters. Is that as strong or as tough as they all are, and even the ones that aren't as outwardly tough or
Mhm.
outwardly strong, they all kind of have that insecurity that like that makes them a little bit more real. I think if there was one major line that's kind of that goes through all of my books, it's that most of my characters do deal with that duality of like, how do I become the hero without actively
Mm.
thinking like that they are the hero. So I think that's a big deal.
Does the romance complicate that, or does it usually become the solvable thing that helps them kind of get over things?
Both. I think for characters like Ava and Cass, for instance, the romance obviously complicates things, but at the same time, it also is kind of what their relationship together before they're together is what gives them strength. They're able to lean on another person or understand that there's a person who can just, you don't have to do anything. Sometimes you just have to be there, or sometimes
Mm.
you just need the quiet support, right? So I definitely think for a lot of my characters, the romance is always at the center, but
Mm.
it's not always the driving force. It's the support, and it doesn't always come from the leading men. Sometimes it comes from the best friends, or it
Mhm.
comes from the mother, or it comes
Mm.
from a character that's in a completely different world than they are. But I definitely think that's one of those defining factors of my work.
All right, so so you have some interconnected series here. So
Mhm.
tell everybody, if you were advising somebody who's just getting introduced to your world, where would you have them start?
I would start with the Ava Crowley Vampire Slayer series, which the first book in that is Blood and Bones. You can read the Ava Crowley Slayer series by itself, which
Mhm.
right now it is 3 books. There will be more coming out in that. Or you could read it in conjunction with the Hunter Games, which is her brother's series. They do all go together, so they can be read as separate series, or they could be read as one giant series. So it's kind of like a however you want to read it, but both of those series are very good starters.
Which book do you tend to gravitate toward? Which book do you love the most? I mean, I know it's like choosing your children, but
Oh
what
God,
book do
yeah.
you feel like you're very proud of that you maybe doesn't get enough love?
I would definitely say I my favorite child is Ava and Cass. That's Ava Crowley. But I also really love my best-selling series, which is Monsters of Ashwood.
Mhm.
It's a much darker series than the rest of my series. It's trigger warning happy, so there is a list. Go check it before you read it. And Archmage. Archmage came out in October. It is
Mhm.
a vampire rockstar menage romance. So again, with the mashups, but it is a tale of addiction. It is a tale of codependency. It deals with a lot of mental illness topics.
Mm.
And there's a lot buried beneath the spice. There really is. And
Mm.
one of the things that I'm most proud of with that book is I almost didn't write it. So when I was going through some things last year, like last June, I transitioned to becoming a full-time author, and it wasn't an easy transition. And I had a lot of books going on that were slated to be written. Some stuff was getting
Mm.
pushed back, this and that. And it got to the point where Archmage was going to come out in about 2 weeks, and I hadn't written it. And I thought I was going to have to cancel the pre-order. I thought there's no way I'm going to be able to write this book. And I wrote the book. I dictated half of it, cleaned it up, wrote the other half, and somehow, some way, this book made it out. And so to me, it always kind of stands as what I'm capable of. When I don't know what I'm capable of, I go, well, look at that. I didn't think this book was going to be written, and here it is. So.
Well, I was going to ask you a follow-up question, but I feel like that was the perfect answer to kind of transition right into our questionnaire for us. So what do you say we take the questionnaire?
Sure.
All right. So we're going to do the Le Questionnaire, invented by the great Bernard Pivot and then perfected by the awesome James Lipton for when he did it for Inside the Actor Studio. And I've taken it for my purposes to torture my guests. I mean, learn more about my guests and, kind of tailor it towards who we are. And so, Ariel, I'd love to know, what is your favorite word to write?
My favorite word to write, or my favorite curse word?
We'll get to the curse word part. Don't worry about it.
my favorite word to write. Oh, good God. I have a love affair with the word though. I use though a lot.
Awesome. What's your least favorite word to write?
Least favorite word to write, as, because again, I have a love affair with as, and a lot of times when I'm reading stuff back, I'm going, oh my God, just like, how many times have I used this word? I've seen this 1,000 times.
I totally relate, because that was is mine, and like every time I always look for a way to not use was. That's always my thing now. It's like I'm so in my head about that.
I'm also terrible with the semicolons. My publisher will literally kill me.
So
so
I knew there was a reason. I knew there was a reason I really like you. Semicolons rule. They're not used enough, I think.
I have a tendency to overuse and not use them when I should be using them, and so I've just built like a love-hate relationship with the semicolon.
Damn editors want to turn everything into a colon. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
That's a good question. Empathy.
Nice.
Empathy.
What turns you off?
Arrogance.
All right. Now here's the part where you get to have fun. What is your favorite curse word?
The F-bomb, of course. Ask my lovely publisher how many times I use the F word. Every now and then she will send me a count and be like, you have used this 52 times.
So, I've never heard that it was a crutch word before. That's pretty cool.
I think it's just one of those things, like creative cursing, like, because I oftentimes when I'm envisioning dialogue, I just envision people talking like, like me and my friends talking. We curse a lot.
So what sound or noise do you love?
Sound or noise? I listen to music a lot, especially when I write. So I build playlists often into my books. So I want to say just music in general, and probably whatever playlist that I'm organizing for my books.
Nice. What sound or noise do you dislike?
Silence. I'm not good with silence.
Interesting. All right. What character of yours would put their face on the currency of their world?
That's a really good one. Who would put their face on currency in their world? I'm probably gonna have to go with, I feel like Dustin, maybe from Starfall Creek. He's kind of a little bit of a control freak. I feel like if anybody would want to see his face on anything, it would be him.
Nice. What artistry would you love to try that you've never done before?
That's a really good question. Because as an ADHD neurodivergent, I've tried a lot of artistries. I think probably I would like to try my hand at maybe something a little bit more detail oriented. I tried to do a dream catcher and do like weaving and stuff like that, and I got very full of rage because I just don't have the brain for that. So I feel like I would like to try something more detailed like that.
Okay. What artistry would you never try? What is something you'll never do?
Music. I cannot I cannot read music, and I have no rhythm when it comes to like that sort of thing. So
So, if heaven exists or whatever you believe in beyond exists,
Mhm.
what would you like to hear God say when you arrive?
That he didn't read my book. I did not read your book.
Well, for the purpose of this conversation, we hope that is not true of the audience out there that watches this and gets to know you. We hope
Mhm.
that everybody goes out and reads these wonderful books of yours and
Yes.
gets into these series. And you have quite a few of them, so there's no excuse for anybody to not get sucked into all the worlds and not take a look at what Ariel's doing. Tell everybody, Ariel, where they can find these lovely books of yours.
I am pretty much everywhere that you find books. I am on Amazon. I have a lot of stuff in Kindle Unlimited. I do have some stuff that is wide. You can follow me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I'm pretty much everywhere.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. This was an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I thank you for taking the time to do this with me.
Same. Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
Awesome, everybody. Well, we'll be back again soon with another 21 grams. Until then, remember that it's always time to go indie now, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.